Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in dockets number 2021-143E and 2021-144E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners J. Williams, C. Williams, and Belzer. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Powers, Caston, and Thomas. Before we broke for the day, yesterday we had witness Ford and Huber on the stand, and we were at the commissioner question portion. Commissioners, questions for these witnesses. Vice Chair Belzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon. Mr. Huber, I think you're probably my primary focus this afternoon. Sorry about that. I recall yesterday that you indicated, and I wrote down this phrase, trend that the entire industry is going to. Do you remember that, talking about this proposal?
I do, yes.
Okay. Can you flesh that out for me a little bit?
Sure. So maybe starting at a higher level, I think there's general recognition that in order to help balance the system and to decarbonize, the customer has to be more involved. It can't just be the old days where you've got dispatchable, large-scale gen and just load that's non-responsive. So there's a more focus of putting the customer or having customer-sided technologies more at the grid edge. This can also help with distribution constraints, in a particular area. Say there's a growth on a circuit. Instead of a traditional upgrade to that line, you could engage customers and potentially decrease the need for that upgrade. So generally, there's this trend to putting more resources on with the customer to address localized system need and bulk system need. Now, the localized is still in the early phases. The bulk has been around, for some time, but recently, because of technology advances and just cost declines, more and more focus is continuing to go with the customer. This could be things, as I mentioned before, like smart thermostats. It could be energy storage. It could be EVs. Obviously, new rate designs, behavioral demand response, things of that nature. Getting to the customer premise, and so then it's like, okay, well, all of a sudden we have all these new resources potentially with the customer. How do we orchestrate them all? How do they all work together? And the industry is moving toward having, more of a, and I used this term yesterday, but a holistic approach so that you do not have say the switch on the hot water heater controlled by one company, and then you have if the customer has a pool pump, that's a whole nother separate company. There's a focus to try to get this all in a clean way to operate for the grid and for what's needed. So how does that relate to what's in front of us? Well, typically and historically, you've had a separation of different customer-sided resources. Typically, solar was set aside, not analyzed through the EE cost effectiveness tests. It was just frankly just too expensive. It was sort of out of the realm of possibility of including in EE programs when it first came out. So there were special programs that were made for it, including net metering. And then as the industry matured, it just never sort of broke out of its own silo. And so I think.
And you say the industry matured, you're talking about solar industry.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. When the solar industry matured, the technology, the financing, just the general cost structure of it. And so I think there's a general recognition that, hey, we probably, the utility industry doesn't want to create that same situation where you've got this really key technology in isolation. And so that's, and I think, with electric vehicles, energy storage, everyone's trying to bring things together more holistically. And so with solar energy, as you see different programs start to develop, solar might still be treated in the, we're not going to give a cost effectiveness test program line, but it's being more and more integrated with other forms of customer-sided technology. So I mentioned yesterday weatherization programs. More and more of those programs are incorporating solar energy. So that has been the general trend, is to bring these resources together and operating synergistically rather than separating them out or having one customer group just get solar energy and then they don't do anything with energy efficiency or demand response, or you have other groups, you know, that other customer segments that do their, you know, some other upgrade. So that's generally what I was getting at.
Okay, you were not indicating that solar being bundled with something and calling it EE, that is the trend. Is that correct?
More of just solar being bundled with other products and services is a trend, and there's some starts of as I mentioned before, getting solar into weatherization programs, proposal to get solar in an EE program in Massachusetts. But in general, it's still the early stages, absolute early stages of solar as part of a typical standard energy efficiency program.
And you mentioned moving toward carbon-free or carbon neutral, whatever the term may be, and I know what we did in the IRP docket and stuff, but to your knowledge, in South Carolina, is there any legislation indicating moving or to carbon-free or any to reduce carbon?
Not that I'm aware of.
Is there any in North Carolina?
North Carolina just passed 951, and I believe there's some targets in that bill.
Okay. And has the governor signed that? I think he signed it, hadn't it? It's law.
Yes, Vice Chair,
Okay.
I believe so.
But the company has a carbon-free goal, do they not?
Yeah, a net zero goal by 2050,
Okay.
And then a target by 2030 as
Okay.
well.
Now, I'm looking at your rebuttal testimony on page 6 and over to the top of page 7.
Okay.
You with me? This is where you're citing to prior commission orders in the generic NEM docket and in the solar choice docket.
That's right. Yep, I'm there.
Is it Duke's position that they can call this proposal EE, an energy efficiency program, based on the language from those orders?
Vice Chair, not solely. No, this is further guidance that we saw was in the right direction, corresponded to the state statute, but this was not the sole anchor by any means. But we saw it as the continued green light as solar as EE, or at least the self-consumption part of solar as EE.
Well, I'll tell you, I've got some concerns with calling this solar. I'm listening to both sides, but I'll tell you, I left here yesterday feeling a bit hoodooed, quite honestly. And because I felt like my understanding from these prior dockets, we were moving in one direction, and then all of a sudden, here we get hit over the head with language from our order saying, well, you've ordered this, so we can do this, okay? And I particularly felt a little bit taken advantage of, because quite obviously from the information that's come out from this hearing, Duke had this proposal in the planning stage, trying to figure it out before we were even in the hearing for the NEM generic docket, and before that order came out, and before we were in the hearing for the solar choice docket. So I felt like, okay, maybe we were led down this path, you know, behind the meter solar, you know, people are reducing their energy usage. That should be treated as EE, and we looked at it and actually that made sense to me. I can only talk for myself. That kind of made sense. This customer has installed solar. they've reduced what they're taking from the company. It's the same, or could be looked at as them buying a washing machine, high-efficiency washing machine, high-efficiency dishwasher, whatever other appliances they could put in their house to reduce their consumption that are energy efficient. So that made sense, and that's how I was correlating it. And then all of a sudden, I felt like I was getting hit over the head with these orders saying, well, oh, they said this, we can do this. Can you understand why I'm feeling a little bit frustrated at the moment?
Yeah, Vice Chair, I completely get it, and maybe I can try to correct the record a little bit of, this is in the heat of rebuttal, to a witness that uses a definition from the federal, from one federal agency, and I'm trying to provide a balance of something that is much more local than a federal definition from one particular agency. And so it's sort of the back and forth of testimony. So I certainly didn't mean to imply that, hey, these few sentences give us the complete green light, from the commission, and if that's all you need to look at. It was just, me saying, hey, there's another side to this, which is look at some of the language that came out of the commission.
Well, and I've gone back to the orders and looked at them, and quite honestly, I mean, I've done this throughout my career, I think. You get later on and you think, God, we could have had a better word choice there or better phraseology or something, because you never know how things are going to be taken. So, but I just, let me ask you this. Given the definition in, 583720, that under the energy efficiency or demand side management chapter of our code, and there is the language in there about demand side activities, and that includes renewables. I'm talking very broadly here. I don't have the statute in front of me. I could pull it up. But why was this filed as energy efficiency and not demand side management?
That's a good question. I think the programs just generally, and perhaps the other part of the statute label it as energy efficiency instead of demand side activities. I think witness staff would probably know more the history of how things are labeled. So unfortunately, I don't have that. How things have been labeled essentially and what umbrella.
Is this labeled energy efficiency because under the mechanism for EE and DSM, there is the 10.6 return, there is a return to the utility. Is that why it's being called this?
I don't believe so. To me, this checks all the boxes of having a program that reduces consumption from the grid and demand, and passes all the cost effectiveness tests, and it's basically again the next evolution of technology in a holistic demand side management program, and we've treated this just like any other measure in the energy efficiency portfolio. So there's been no special treatment, other than obviously we stripped out the exports, right? And so we're trying to create creating what I believe is just completely standard filing from just like any other energy efficiency measure, and it does, as I think witness Duff has testified, it does the same thing as certain energy efficiency measures behind the meter.
I've been intrigued by the program. I really, really am. It's just making it fit in the box, I suppose. And the other concern is that I think that as a commissioner, I have to look at is cost to non-participating ratepayers. Are you aware of any discussion to have filed this maybe as an experimental program? Let's see how it works, protect the other ratepayers until we see if it's actually going to pay out and be beneficial to everybody. I understand about the modeling, but modeling is like forecast. Mm-hmm. The only thing you know is it's going to change. has there been any discussion? Let's do this as on a limited basis with a limited number of customers as an experimental program to protect the other ratepayers. Keep track of cost, expenses, things like that, until we can show that it is cost effective and not going to be a burden on non-participating customers.
Yeah, Vice Chair, I think our feeling on this is the program inherently has all the guardrails anyway, and you can keep making tweaks in real time to the program. And the cost effectiveness tests, especially for the primary screen, was so far and above a 1.0 that there's significant amount of buffer, even if the forecast, as you mentioned, is off. I believe it was like one of them was 2.5 ratio on the cost benefit side. So if this was closer to a 1.0 on the primary screen, I think we'd be like, let's think about this a bit. But because there's so much of a buffer there, and the fact that these programs inherently are always looking at, they have strict accounting, strict true up, strict independent evaluation, that it was safe to go forward with this as a standard program, again, for a subset of customers. And I think, for the first year, we're expecting around 630 customers for the first year. And so that isn't an overwhelming amount. I think it's a good sample size for us to then work and say, hey, is there anything that we missed? Are there anything to enhance it? And were we right on those cost effectiveness tests? And as Witness Duff mentioned, we have the incentive to be overly conservative when we put together these cost effectiveness tests. So being conservative and getting that 2.5, we saw the green light to move forward like a traditional program.
Well, if this were to be approved and it moves forward and you get those 600 something customers in the first year, and then the company comes in and asks for tweaks to the program, those 600 customers would still be under that original iteration for 25 years. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there might be still, there's programmatic elements that could still be changed for them. And maybe I should say modified. So for instance, when we have a call on the thermostat or a CPP event, right, we can, maybe the manner of notification wasn't super customer friendly. I'm totally just throwing this out as hypothetical, right. But we're like, okay, well, let's hire, let's get an expert digital firm to figure out what's the best way to communicate to customers, to maybe give them more tips and help them respond to these peak events. Maybe we get it incorporated in an app that they can use. Things like that can be modified and worked on for existing participants. Would we rip out the panels? No, but there's certain things that at least can still be modified for that 600.
Yeah, I think I'm thinking about more of major tariff type changes. That if in a year or two, because I think testimony's been, it's going to be 2 years before costs are really kind of recovered, right? 2024.
That's what I believe to be the case.
Until then, if we get to there and Duke says, we might need to tweak this tariff a little bit, anybody that signed up under the first approval, they're going to basically be grandfathered under those provisions for the length of their 25 years, are they not?
So there's two moving pieces, and one is the tariff, and then one is more the structure of the EE program. The tariff doesn't have necessarily a lock-in for 25 years by any means. There's certain provisions where I believe we won't change the time period for the customers that sign up for 10 years, but then there's a bunch of other ways to change the rate design. So so I think from that side of the the transaction, I think there's some more flexibility. However, I think as we all know, we don't want to significantly change the economics of a customer right after we just encourage them to make an investment. So there's just the natural.
Well, and that's why I'm asking that. I'm not as talking about the economics to the customer that comes in under the program. I'm trying to pay attention to the customers that are not in the program that may be paying costs associated with the program.
Got it. And so for that, if we see something, we could file for a tariff change. That could certainly come in front of the commission if parties and others are clamoring for it. That doesn't have to wait necessarily, as long as we're being respectful for customers that have already made that investment. So we would then say, okay, well, this would be for the next tranche of customers.
Okay. And just so I don't leave this proceeding and feel like I did last night, if this is approved and we issue an order and there's some language in there that Duke likes particularly, what's the next thing that y'all are going to roll out trying to tie it into this one? Because given past experience, y'all are already looking at something else to to bring forth.
I must not have done a great job instilling confidence last night. So, but
it wasn't you. It was not you.
I'm going to be just completely transparent, and Duke was just recognized for the most transparent utility in S&P. So I'm going to continue that streak. But I will say that batteries will be next. I think that it's a natural evolution, again, to try to take advantage of customers that are pursuing batteries for their own, say, backup needs, but then also taking advantage of that while, when they're not using that battery. So I think, the general trend will be to bring more and more dispatchability to these customers, and so the thermostat is pretty low-hanging fruit because you can get a pretty decent demand reduction for a low price. Batteries are a totally different story. So you need the customer to engage in a primary use case first to make it really pencil. So that is usually backup power. So taking advantage of customers that already see value in that, and then, I should say, not taking advantage of the customer, but taking advantage of the fact that they have already pursued or about to pursue battery storage for maybe not strictly economic means. So batteries are natural if they can be cost effective, and that's an if. If they are cost effective, the economics work with splitting between the participant and the non-participant. That would be probably the next filing before you, assuming that the thermostat program goes off without a hitch. Say if you were to approve it, that we get sign-ups that customers like it, that everything's working. I would see a battery proposal.
What if we don't approve this?
If
I'm sure they got separate paths in the planning.
I mean, then I think it's basically and there's it's a huddle with all the signatories and other stakeholders to figure out what to do next. I think that's probably most we can do, but we don't have any formalized plans other than getting all together and figuring it out.
Y'all have not filed this in North Carolina yet, is that right?
Not yet.
That's kind of backwards, isn't it? I thought Duke always filed in North Carolina, then came here and said, North Carolina's approved it. Y'all need to approve it. Years of experience here, Mr. Huber.
Yeah,
You don't have to answer.
Okay, all right.
Thank you. I appreciate your patience with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vice Chair.
That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman.
Commissioner Williams, then Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. it is fascinating to be here in the room and be able to read faces particularly while Vice Chair Belzer was asking her questions. And she was asking about the process and the decision. Did you consider identifying this program as demand side management rather than EE? And it looked like you wanted to say something, witness forward. So would you like to add anything to that answer?
Apparently I don't have a poker face.
I don't either. I've got to learn it.
Well, I was actually looking at the statute when Vice Chair was asking the question, so I think I had a little bit of an advantage over Mr. Huber because I could actually look through it. I think what was going through my mind is the statute actually does not clarify, or I guess delineate what's energy efficiency and what's demand side management. It bundles everything under that term demand side activity. I think the separation of whether it's energy efficiency or demand side management is more of a company specific designation. And typically the way it goes is energy efficiency is something that reduces that consumption from the grid. You use less kilowatt hours from Duke. Whereas demand side management is you're reducing your demand, especially that's very valuable to a utility in the hot summer afternoons, cold winter mornings like we've had here. If you can get a customer to not turn on their dishwasher and their washing machine and turn down their heat specifically, which is why the thermostat piece is so beneficial, that reduces their demand at a time that usually the energy is very expensive to generate. So it's more of an internal designation, but when you look at 583720, it lumps it all together as demand side activity.
And I'm thank you for that. Was there any debate about how to label this program?
Not that I know of. I think it was pretty clear from the beginning. The winter BYOT is a demand response program, so that's that demand side management because it allows the utility to curtail the customer's electric heat. So that is reducing that demand at a peak moment. Whereas solar is you're looking at the customer buying less kilowatt hours. They're reducing their consumption from the grid. It's an energy efficiency program because Duke is not having to produce those kilowatt hours for that customer.
Okay. Thank you. In Mr. Huber, yesterday you talked about you would have a few other examples of ways that Duke decided to be conservative in your estimates beyond the 5 or 6 that Witness Duff gave me. Would you like to add? Can you add to those?
And I don't have his list in front of me.
I won't. We can double count.
Okay. So there was the fact that I think 40% of systems are financed, and that significantly impacts the TRC, assuming that a customer can borrow less than 6.61% or something around there. So that can have a big impact. I think I mentioned that yesterday of just a 3%, if you can get like a home equity loan for 3%, that reduces the cost by 30% of the PV system.
And what was the choice you all made?
We didn't include any financing at all. So that has a potential impact, at least on the TRC, because it treats the private investment as a cost. So then we were also conservative. He mentioned, Witness Stuff mentioned the free rider side of things. We did not assume any customer response to the CPP events or the thermostat, other than just the thermostat is adjusted by us, but like the customer doesn't actually do anything beyond that. So
Okay.
So no customer response to that.
Like behavioral kind of response?
Correct.
Okay.
No energy efficiency from the smart thermostat as well, just the DR side of things. So a lot of thermostats have programs where they'll learn the TOU or the customer pattern and then reduce usage every day versus just on events. We did not include that either. I think those were probably two added
Okay.
But there was just every chance we got, we took the more conservative. Oh, obviously we didn't include non-energy benefits, and there's a
Right.
whole slew of those as well.
Yesterday, there was a conversation, and you actually started it today, about the fact that you haven't applied to the North Carolina Utilities Commission. But yesterday, there was a conversation about having an initial conversation with them. What did they tell you?
So maybe just a little bit of background.
Great.
We've held, I think, 7 or 8 stakeholder meetings in North Carolina on this topic. There's some tailoring that has to be done for North Carolina, and then there's North Carolina stakeholders that weren't a part of the South Carolina stakeholder process. So we went through it all. The rate designs are slightly different given the difference in states, but very similar. The surveys that we put out, or we sent out to the participants in this process, were generally positive and said, "Hey, move forward." And so public staff were part of those surveys. And this is a general comprehensive rate review. Now, I would say, and I don't know how much I can say from private meetings with public staff, but again, in the spirit of transparency, my feeling is that they would have an issue as well with the EE designation, perhaps. The statutes. The statute in North Carolina, while Duke certainly thinks it allows this, it's certainly not as broad as South Carolina, and so I would hazard a guess from the survey results and conversations, they're probably good with the TOU CPP side of things is my feeling, but there'll be a lot of hesitancy on the energy efficiency side is my prediction.
Did you all consider in either state kind of advocating for statute clarity, for a bill that might more clearly define energy efficiency?
In South Carolina?
Yeah, or North Carolina, but I ask about either.
Yeah, I mean, I think just in general, and again, as a layperson, my read is that the South Carolina is actually pretty clear and broad on this. Some states, I think North Carolina included, take a pretty, I would say, like old school view of energy efficiency and just conservation in general. So let me just give you just an example, and this is from my time in the Southwest U.S., where when you have a lot of solar in the system, there's times where you don't want to conserve energy. It's actually harmful to conserve energy or costly. Integration cost of renewables goes up, or you have to pay negative pricing, or you have to curtail solar. So you see a lot of states that have certain definitions that are like, no, you must conserve at all times no matter what. Well, that has to change because of the way that you have excess renewables on the system. Renewables are zero marginal cost. And so they get merit order in the dispatch. Is essentially they get the top treatment, the VIP treatment, if you will, because there's zero marginal cost. There's no fuel. So if you have an overabundance of a particular clean resource, there's as I mentioned before, you have integration issues with it. You might have negative power prices. You might actually have to pay someone to take the energy off your hands. In this case, this was happening a lot. California was paying Arizona to take excess solar energy off of their system. And so do you want, in that situation, don't you want programs to load build during those times when you have high renewables, right? And isn't it just good economics in general to tell, say, an industrial customer when prices are near zero on the wholesale market, hey, if you can, please use more during this time period. It'll help everybody out. So there's statutes like that are still adjusting to this huge transition that we all were talking about last night, where we have a huge change in our generation fleet, and we've got big changes down at the customer side too, all happening at the same time. And just in regulation, statutes are going to have to adjust to that reality.
That was very helpful, and I wish this were a more casual conversation and we could dig into it more. And I think there's something there that that I would relate to the previous question about statute sort of changes that might have helped this process from my perspective. But thank you. I have no further questions.
Commissioner Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman Williams. I guess I have some of the same concerns that can you hear me and see me?
Yes,
Now we can. Yep.
All right, thank you. So I have some of the same concerns that were expressed by the Vice Chair. And, I started out at the beginning of this process, I think on the first day, just saying, that I appreciate the potential for innovation, something new coming along. And, but, we have to look at it from all sides. And this thing obviously is very controversial and very contentious. And, we've got ORS that's supposed to be looking out for customers. And so anyway, I've just been thinking about the whole thing overall and just wondering if there is a low risk way to give this a try. And so I kind of thought of a few things, and I'd just like to run them by you and just see what your thoughts are. First off, I think that perhaps an experimental program is not a bad idea, as Vice Chair mentioned as well. I was just thinking in terms of how about if it would be agreed to that we could put this out there as a 2-year experimental program. And then to address another issue that was raised by the Vice Chair, that given that this could perhaps be an experimental program, could we keep this order, this docket, these proceedings, whatever comes out of this, keep this as confined to this proceeding, this order cannot be used as precedent in any way by Duke or anybody else. So that might help to address the issue that the Vice Chair was talking about a minute ago. And then third part of the thought process would be, okay, well, we still need to have this thing evaluated by ORS. And so after the 2-year period, be subject to complete evaluation by ORS using all of the appropriate tests. And then in the meantime, during this 2-year period, all costs and benefits would be isolated in a deferred account until the evaluation is complete. And if the program passes, then everything flows through just like it normally would. If it doesn't pass, then shareholders would pay for the experiment. That reduces, in my opinion, risk to everyone. And just wondering if you thought there was any way that something like that could work out for the company or the parties or innovators, anybody, everybody. Just like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, Commissioner, I appreciate the thoughts. It is a bit hard to say just just me in isolation here without talking to management on these things, but I would say that Duke feels that they're as I was talking about before, this is a very low risk proposition, and there's all the safeguards in place that you've already mentioned in terms of accounting. There's independent evaluation of this, and we feel that it deserves the same treatment as any other energy efficiency measure, as we took it through the exact same process. But it's hard for me to say in terms of, I think if anything could work, it might be number one of classifying it as I think there's a specific designation that is typical in energy efficiency programs for a pilot, perhaps. So that may be the only thing, but this is bigger than just me, and actually bigger than just Duke as well. So there's a lot of other parties involved.
Okay. I appreciate that, and I understand you saying that we, being the company, think that this is low risk and the guardrails are in place. But obviously, we listened to everybody, and we've heard that other parties don't necessarily feel that way, particularly ORS. We have to take everybody's input into account and balance it out. And so I'm still just wondering if this could be somehow or another come together as something that would reduce risk, not just for the company, but for others as well. Any thoughts on that?
I guess the first part of that is taking issue with the fact that this program doesn't ace on cost effectiveness. I mean, there's a significant buffer, and the only way that ORS was able to get to that, to some of their claims, is by using just an extreme assumption that, as Witness Duff mentioned, usually free ridership is 18%, and they went up to 79%. That was basically what the entire case on cost effectiveness came down to, was changing this very in an extreme way, and there's absolutely no look. It was completely one-sided in terms of costs and benefits. There was no look at adding any type of benefit to the other side of the equation. So I just feel like there's almost a little bit of a false sense of risk and false sense of controversy a little bit here on the cost effectiveness test, given how one-sided Witness Horry's analysis was, and the fact that there's non-energy benefits that Dominion uses that were not included in his analysis. And I pointed out the fact that he didn't include the financing savings, and he said, well, if the company didn't show it, if the company didn't, then I'm not going to, basically something to that effect. So that it was purposely almost ignoring any possible way to make the cost effectiveness more fair and balanced already from our very conservative approach. So that's the first response. I think that it would be a very hard sell to parties and Duke to change up the structure of this filing dramatically, especially as it relates to the net loss revenue side of things, which is again, we are encouraging customers to do X measure, and excluding that completely changes how we file the program, how energy efficiency is done. And regarding shareholder incentives, that's a 90-10 split. If there's no savings, we don't receive any. Ratepayers receive, 89%, something to that degree. So I think in general, we would likely withdraw the program if there were significant modifications to the tune of all four of those proposals. Just again, I'm only one person here, but that would be my read of the situation.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have at this point. Thank you.
Chairman Williams.
Commissioner Caston.
Good afternoon, Mr. Huber. I have a question, if I may. Can you hear me?
Yeah, good afternoon, Commissioner.
Good afternoon. Thank you so much. In your response to Commissioner Thomas just then, when he was talking about the hypothetical of what if the program could be experimental or whatever, and in your response, I certainly understood that you cannot speak absolutely about that one way or the other. But did I understand in your response that any consideration of that, if it was considered, it would or could only probably be considered if, in essence, rooftop solar is considered EE? Is that what I think I heard you say?
I'm sorry, Commissioner. Can you just repeat that just to make sure I captured that right? Is it the classification that you're zooming in on?
In your response to Commissioner Thomas relative to a hypothetical experimental program, I thought I understood in your response, to say something along the lines that, those things could be considered, you'd have to talk to the group. But I thought I heard you say that it was like a qualification that for it to even be considered, in essence, rooftop solar would have to be considered EE. Is that a correct assumption on my part?
I think it's more of if anything is materially changed from how we structure energy efficiency programs, since this was filed to conform to just how we present any measure, any other EE measure. And so to the extent that there's a material change to all the different treatments and true ups, M&V, then I think that's where it would probably cross I guess the line into withdraw. And so that can manifest in different ways. If the proposal is something that is done in more of a standard way in the typical energy efficiency program, then I think that that has more of a chance. So without having to withdraw the application. So I think I think the general gist is the more and the closer to what we filed, and if there's a deviation, that deviation follows typical deviations in energy efficiency programs, I think that's a higher likelihood for success. But as you noted, I'm only one person in this.
Okay. Let me ask it directly, because I'm honestly not sure I'll follow that, but I'll try to. I think so. In essence, if anything changes, that probably won't work. So let me just ask it directly. If this commission chooses or does not agree that solar PV is EE, what what does that do to your program?
Well, I guess we're in this hypothetical where if it was treated as we filed it, but you said, hey, we're going to ring fence this, this is an EE at this time, but everything else remains the same. And again, I'm not a legal expert, so there could be some landmines there that I have like no idea about, right? But, you know, on a temporary basis, there's a possibility there, you know, if all else remains the same. So I don't know, does that help at all?
I don't really know. I think so, but I'm trying to reconcile, you know, the long definitions and I guess some of the discussions that you know, just had. And again, I'm not trying to paint you in a corner and I'm not trying to be combative. I honestly and truly want to understand. And I think it's safe for me to say that I think I understand that if there's any substantive changes to what Duke Energy has proposed, we'll withdraw the program. One of those substantive changes, if the commission either does not concur that this is an EE program, you know, ESM, EE, you know, I've heard all kind of different discussions and heard Ms. Ford's definitions. Is that a generally safe statement if there is any specific or any changes to what Duke has proposed, then they will most likely withdraw this program?
Commissioner, I would say any material changes that deviate from how energy efficiency is typically it's typically carried out. I would agree with your assessment. If there's some type of naming convention that changes, right, that doesn't materially impact anything, you know, there's a possibility there. But what you said was generally, you know, spot on. Is that you know, there will be a withdrawal if there's a significant deviation here from how we treat any other energy efficiency measure, because that's how it was filed and modeled.
Understand.
Commissioner Caston,
I say anything that deviates from how EE is typically defined, and I think that is the crux of the matter, at least with me, because I'm not sure how understanding perhaps what I'm hearing is being typically defined is not necessarily how IMA is typically defined. But that said, I guess that's still the issue. But I think, Ms. Ford, you were going to say something. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Oh, no, that's not a problem at all. And I hate to interject. Again, I think I have the benefit because I have the EE statute in front of me. And this might provide clarity. I may be giving myself a little too much credit, but I think the deviation that Mr. Huber is referencing is that in 583720, it states that if approved as an energy efficiency program, demand side management, whatever falls under that demand side activity, under the EE statute, as I call it, it says that it allows energy suppliers and distributors to recover cost and obtain a reasonable rate of return on their investment in qualified demand side management programs sufficient to make those programs at least as financially attractive as construction of new generating facilities. Require the Public Service Commission to establish rates and charges that ensure that the net income of an electrical or gas utility regulated by the Commission after implementation of specific cost-effective energy conservation measures is at least as high as the net income would have been if the energy conservation measure had not been implemented. And I think that's the piece, and within that, of course, is, you know, the program costs, the PPI, the performance incentive, and then the net loss revenues. And so I think the designation as energy efficiency, I don't know if it necessarily the words, but that it does qualify as an approved program under 583720 if there was a deviation from that, and then the recovery elements that are in the statute. I don't want to put words in Mr. Huber's mouth, but I think that may be the piece that he was referencing. Again, I have the benefit of having it right in front of me.
Well, that part has not been lost on me. That if it falls in the category as Duke says it does, then the financial aspects are one thing versus if it does not. And I've heard, I think, the blurring of lines, at least to me, between DSM. I've heard demand side, I've heard demand side management, I've heard EE, and I've kind of almost heard them used interchangeably. Are you saying the EE and DSM are the same?
I would say that the language in the statute does not differentiate. It actually lumps it all together as demand side activity. And so I would, I think if the commission were to say this is a demand side activity, that is approved under 583720, I don't think that would, I'm not going to speak for anyone, I don't think that would necessarily give anyone heartburn. It would be whether or not it complies with 583720 that would be the area of concern.
I want to make sure I understand again. Are you saying, or is it Duke's position that demand side management and energy efficiency are one and the same?
I think from a program,
there's no distinction.
From a programmatic level, no. I think the company does have a distinction, but when looking at the statute, I think Duke recognizes that the 583720 bundles everything under an umbrella of demand side activity. And so there's the large umbrella of demand side activity, and then underneath that there could be energy efficiency, conservation program, demand response, demand side management, however you want to designate those, but they all fall under the large umbrella in 583720 of demand side activity.
That is your interpretation of that section?
Yes, sir, that is my interpretation.
And Commissioner,
No. Yes.
I was also going to recommend, to the extent that we, really get into some of the programmatic features, witness stuff would probably be really good to have to give his expertise on this, given our my role in all this and Ms. Ford's role. So just, putting that out there, that witness stuff might also be able to add some value to the conversation.
I appreciate it. Thank you guys so much for hanging around late on a Friday afternoon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. We're getting close to the end here. Yes, sir. Commissioner Powers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And just a couple of quick questions, Mr. Huber. Maybe even I can get a yes or no answer. I hadn't heard one in weeks or months. Stuff we deal with. On page 9 of your testimony, when you're talking about witness Ori's TRC results, I think the language you use, and we just may be talking about semantics, said he artificially lowered the results, I guess, to get the answer he wanted. You're not saying that was some intentional misstatement on his part, are you?
No, Commissioner, and I'll be brief, but it was just the fact that it was completely one-sided. I mean, usually in these debates, you can expect that from certain parties, but usually they throw you at least one bone, and just to try to look even-handed, and they try to add a benefit just to seem non-biased on it. But in this particular analysis, he did not include one possible benefit or one possible change that could move it even an inch to the beneficial side. And this is just a glaring example considering that the rooftop solar industry has a high amount of finance systems.
Well, I mean, the whole process is adversarial, and everybody tries to bend a yardstick to help themselves. I understand that. I just, maybe I'm sure it's just semantics on your part. One other question, in your discussion about market capital and that you think this would reduce capital and be an incentive to participants, that language, I think your conclusion is on page 11. I cannot understand, and I guess this is a better question. Do you really believe that this incentive to participants, who obviously most of them are what I would call well-heeled or financially solid, do you think that that helps? I don't understand how you could say that helps low-income customers. And when you say low-income customers, I assume you're talking about non-solar customers and regular rate payers. I can't quite grasp that. Do you really believe that there's a benefit to this to low-income people? And nobody's been able to quantify it, is my problem. It's just said that in the future, it's going to be apple pie for everybody. Can you quantify it?
Well, there's two ways to quantify it, Commissioner. So the first is non-participants, which the cost tests have shown that they will benefit from this program without directly participating. And then the other side is the participant. There are certainly customers that do not have the best credit score, but have a sufficient amount of income that want to engage in solar energy, right? And they might not be able to get the full loan for whatever reason. And then I also mentioned that there could, I give an example of there could also be lower income customers that really want to go solar, and this can help them. And there's been, more and more financing options available out in the solar industry. Now, to your point, is solar energy, the program for low income customers? Absolutely not. Any new technology that has high upfront costs, that's going to start in the upper incomes and work its way down, as we've seen in the solar industry. When I first got involved in solar, it was extremely expensive. Only the richest, most environmentally conscious folks would get it. Then it started to become low in price. There started to be loans, there started to be leases, and it started to reach into all different income stratas, just depending on how bad a household really wanted it. So all I'm saying here is that an upfront incentive that helps customers can be meaningful in this particular case, especially if a household really wants to go solar.
Okay. Well, I'm guessing you were a good salesman. Thank you for that explanation. And I don't say that in a negative way. I think the enthusiasm that you show is impressive. Yeah, you believe what you're doing, and that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
All right. Before we let you guys go, or before we go into redirect or recross, I just really want to get some commentary on this energy efficiency issue, because it's been a point of contention throughout the entire hearing. Obviously, there are several definitions, but I just want you all, and you can tag team, or whoever feels best qualified or capable to answer the question, hit your mic. And these may seem like obvious questions, but I'm just trying to prove something to myself at least, or at least flesh something out. What is the purpose of an energy efficiency piece of equipment, whether it be a light bulb or a water tank or water heater?
Do you want to take that one, Lon?
You both can answer.
Yeah, you get started.
I was going to say, I definitely, feel kind of more comfortable looking at the South Carolina definition. As a layman, I would say if you're looking at an appliance or a light bulb, it is using less electricity to do the same, or without disrupting kind of your life. You know, a light bulb might appear slightly different, but it's still lighting the room. So I would say on that, for an in-use appliance like that or a light bulb, I would say that it is using less electricity to produce the same activity.
So what? What's the so what behind that?
And
From a utility perspective, do you want to chime in the benefit to the utility?
yeah, and you probably had it covered, but Chair, and it's all about the impact to the grid. It's about consumption from the grid. It's about demand from the grid. That's why we have all these programs. I probably didn't make the point succinctly, yesterday of why we don't, if there's just like a cabin in the woods that isn't connected to anything, it's just lit by candles. We're not focused on candle efficiency. They're not connected to the grid. There's not that shared infrastructure system. So it's all about that grid. It's all about that shared infrastructure and making a more, just from the grid operator standpoint, a more efficient system. And so that is probably why you see combined heat and power in the energy efficiency program. That is a generator. It's a natural gas generator. And solar hot water heater, we have the conversations back and forth. A therm is energy, and it's doing the same function. If you connect the solar PV directly to an appliance, maybe that can help, visualize it of, okay, well now it's just connected directly to a straight appliance. But at the end of the day, it's all about the grid, and that's why we set up these programs and do these cost effectiveness tests.
And I would add to it, I think customers are the greatest beneficiary of energy efficiency programs because, one, they can lower their bill. If they're buying less from the utility, their bill is lower. If a utility does not have to build additional infrastructure or purchase electricity to meet that demand, then their bill is going to be lower. They're not paying for higher purchase power costs. There's lower fuel costs if you're not having to generate as much. You're not paying for that utility infrastructure. And so customers truly are the primary winners in energy efficiency. And I think that's also why you see in 583720 those components that, if you just look at it in that area, you're just going to say, oh, well, the utilities, they're a winner in this. They get incentives and they get, a return as if they had built a generating unit. But when you look, customers are benefiting from energy efficiency in many ways. Without these incentives that are in place, that would essentially be like telling, Charmin, sell less toilet paper. And obviously a business that makes money off of selling toilet paper would say, you're crazy. I would if I was Charmin. And so I think in 583720, that's why you see all the benefits originally are for customers. And so there has to be some type of incentive for a company that is in the business of building power plants and selling electricity. Why would they not sell as much of their product? And so I would say primarily the win is for the customer. And then there are pieces in there that incentivize a utility to do these programs that benefit customers.
Right. I'm not even that far yet, but thank you for that. It seems as if we've, at points, gotten wrapped around the axle, or I feel as if the attempting to define energy deficiency has been difficult from my perspective, because it almost seems as if we're focusing on a scientific definition in a vacuum as opposed to the practical impact or realized gain of the equipment being energy efficient. I mean, I like analogy. So if the point of the game is to win, and let's say we take football, you win by scoring touchdowns or kicking field goals or keeping the other team from doing the same. As long as you are doing so within the rules, doesn't matter how you really get there. You could run a multitude of different offenses. You could run a multitude of different sets on defense. But as long as you're blocking and tackling and scoring, more than your opponent, you're gonna win. So if a light bulb, a water heater, solar panels cause less causes the utility to generate less energy to meet the customer's need, why is there so much, in your opinion, consternation or pushback on you all's definition of energy efficiency? I'm just really trying to figure out what the issue is.
And I was going to say, I'll start with the statute if you're good with that. I would agree wholeheartedly with that. And I think, a lot of talk has been about EIA and there's a lot of definitions of energy efficiency, and some may apply to the appliances, some may apply to the programs. Each state defines it differently. And so I agree. I think we can't see the forest through the trees because there's been so much focus on one definition that could potentially say this does not meet the standards. And so I would say again that the company has gone back to the South Carolina statute and what was put into place and it actually says adoption of procedures encouraging energy efficiency and conservation. So that's a title there. And so I would say that is really where we need to have our focus. And in that, as you said, it says that it's in-use technologies who invest in energy supply and in-use technologies that are cost effective, which the companies say that they are, environmentally acceptable. I think we would all argue that solar is environmentally acceptable, and reduce energy consumption or demand. And I think that's kind of the crux of it, because these do. It is reducing consumption. The BYOT is reducing demand. And at the end of the day, a customer's consumption and purchases from the utility, the consumption from the grid is reduced.
Right, and so it's reducing consumption of energy from the utility.
Correct.
Right? They may generate energy from the sun, and this is where I sort of get lost. Mm-hmm. So what? It's not coming from the grid.
Exactly.
Isn't that where the issues start to arise, and the need for building additional generation capacity? If more demand is put on the grid, the utility is responsible to meeting their customers' need.
And that is exactly why the utilities propose these programs.
Well, I don't know about all that. I'm still on energy efficiency.
So Chairman, if I may.
Yes, you may.
So I agree with you. That's the exact spirit of all this. But on avoiding the power plant, whether that's a light bulb, whether that's solar generated behind the customer meter. And I think you asked a follow-on to that question, which is, why is this so controversial? And I think there could be a few reasons. Okay, first, I think ORS is one party, very important party, but there's a lot of parties that agree on this, as we know. Okay, but two, there's been a built-up constituency in the energy efficiency world. These programs have been going on for years, and I'm not just necessarily saying in South Carolina, just overall. And some in the community feel that this is a little bit of a threat because some of the dollars in the EE programs will now be going to solar energy. It's the new kid on campus. Certain constituencies have their favorite measures that they push for various reasons. It could be a manufacturer that produces it, just an advocate that likes it. So there's some angles there. And then the third one, which is what was hit on with Witness Horry yesterday, I believe, to your questions when you asked, what are the sort of the top three things, and one of them was, this could give the solar industry a new playbook. He's playing goalie a bit to block, from certain ideas maybe reaching California, and there's this a general animosity that's been built up in the industry between certain parties where you don't like to see the party that you've been battling for years possibly win as well. So those are three, that's my attempt to try to break down why I think there's a lot of there could be, some pushback, especially from the expert witness Horry.
Well, it's not just him, and I have no idea if what you're saying is true or not. It explains the tension that I sense when discussing these issues. It reminds me of discussions about prototypical quarterbacks, dual threat versus pocket passer. It used to be a time where a dual threat quarterback was considered useless, just an athlete who could throw, and now is sort of the norm. I'm just wondering whether or not we have not caught up with you all, to be quite frank with you. You talk about where the industry is going and decarbonization, and we're going to make more changes in the next 10 years than we've made in the last 100 years. Maybe it could be that it could be the law. I'm not saying that it is, but maybe the law is not where it needs to be for you all to propose a program and have it accepted and praised, as opposed to being subject to such intense scrutiny. I'm thinking. You can talk. I'm thinking.
No, Chairman, I certainly think that, and again, as a layperson, the statute is actually there. I think there's views, and I don't know how much of the views come from or were led from a particular witness or from an agency, but this is more controversial than I anticipated. I'll admit that. I did not think it would get to this type of level. And one of the things that we made sure we did, because we know that there is innovation here, it is a bit new, but that's why we were so conservative with all of our assumptions, and we treated this exactly the same as anything. And so we tried to do our best to limit the controversy here, and to just present this with, the same approach, and even in a very conservative approach. We could have added non-energy benefits. We were very conservative for that reason. So I'd like to say we tried to help a bit on this. We've obviously done that extensive stakeholder outreach. We have, met, a lot of different parties that support this. So, for what that's worth, but as I read the statute, it's broad enough. The history of allowing CHP as energy efficiency, I think that was back in 2009. Solar hot water heating, to me, that, given that those are, CHP's improved energy efficiency program, I just don't see how we can't make this next step to solar PV.
I understand. Well, just so I'm clear, and again, I'm just focusing on the energy efficiency side now. I'm not talking about the cost effectiveness or any of the other measures. Our energy efficient light bulb, refrigerator, HVAC, any appliance does more with less. And the benefit to the customer is that hopefully their monthly bill decreases, and there's less demand on the grid. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
All right. If I put solar panels on my house, I'm going to do more with less energy from the utility, which hopefully will reduce my bill and reduce the demand on the utility. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
All right. All right. No further questions for me. Commissioner Williams. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to ask one more question. The attorneys are going to respond to a request that Vice Chair Belzer made regarding 58-40-20. I'd like to hear your perceptions as you all, you know, thought through how you would present this, from the aspect of, you know, not necessarily anticipating it would be as controversial as it is, but yet, you know, how you packaged it, because that is what this is. So I want to give you all a chance and us a chance to hear your thoughts on, I think, why this doesn't fit the prescription in statute under 584020.
Commissioner Williams, I actually debated whether or not to open this can of worms with the chairman, asking kind of how did it get to this point of being so contentious. I actually think that section I that addresses recovering lost revenues, I think that may be where it all kind of started. That, you know, the company's position is that it's for existing net metering customers, and I'll go through, to answer your question, I'll go through that. I just wanted to talk through this piece, whereas ORS is, you know, saying that that's a blanket to any customer who has solar on their home. And so I think that's actually where the point of contention began, and then it just expanded from there into what's just not even an energy efficiency program in general. So I would actually say that I think this is kind of the crux of where the you know, contentious nature began. So to go to that section, you know, we're looking at it, and I'll just read it, where it says, nothing in this section, however, prohibits an electrical utility from continuing to recover distributed energy resource program costs in the manner and amount approved by Commission Order Number 2015-194 for customer generators applying before June 1, 2021. Such recovery shall remain in place until full cost recovery is realized. Electrical utilities are prohibited from recovering lost revenues associated with customer generators who apply for customer generator programs on or after June 1, 2021. And of course, it's that last sentence that is, you know, I think kind of been honed in on. And as I read through this, and it's my understanding, and I think I have the benefit of being there in Act 236 and actually being the facilitator to help develop the net metering programs. So I'd like to take it back to where we were at that point to kind of get us where we are now. So under Act 236, as I mentioned, I believe in my summary yesterday, you know, I was a facilitator for ORS, and we brought together 17 parties to look at what would net metering look like. Act 236, you know, had us evaluate that. And so we had parties of all different opinions, as similar to what we've had in the stakeholder process here. And you know, you had some parties that were saying, I want a much higher credit for solar. You know, that makes it more financially, more of a financial incentive for folks to develop solar. Others were saying, no, it should be just straight avoided cost. So there are a lot of different opinions. How should we structure that? And what came out of that was a comprehensive agreement with all the parties that said the utility would continue to provide a one-to-one retail rate credit. And so that's really a billing type mechanism. So essentially, you know, a customer uses their electricity, and any excess that they would put on the grid, the utility would credit them at the retail rate. And we'll just say that's 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So a customer would see a bill credit for every excess kilowatt hour at 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And then the argument utilities were making is that may not actually be the value of that energy to the utility. And if you say, well, it would be avoided cost, I'll just say for simplistic math, let's say avoided cost is 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So the utility would be getting a 14 cent per kilowatt hour credit, but the value would be, say, 4 cents. So what happens to that 10-cent differential? And prior to that, it just kind of got rolled in, and you would maybe see it in a rate case down the road. So what Act 236 did was try to bring that out. And so the parties agreed customers would still get that bill credit. They developed a methodology that would calculate what is that value. And while it's very similar to avoided cost, there are other components that are in it. So if that methodology determines that the value is 4 cents, then that 10-cent differential, the utility should not have to forfeit that. And so they would recover those costs through a distributed energy resource program. Those programs, subsequent to the net metering settlement, the utilities filed for distributed energy resource programs. It's a suite of programs similar to energy efficiency that would incentivize distributed energy resource development. One of those programs was a net metering DER incentive. And really what that was is that differential in my, hypothetical situation, that 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And so the utilities were made whole. The customers continued to see that one-to-one benefit. But I think what's very important about this is in the settlement agreement, we had this calculation of how do you calculate this? What is that differential? And if there was that 10-cent differential, it was termed as lost revenue. And so that is the language that was in place when Act 62 came about. And so I think it's very important to note the lost revenue came from that settlement. It's been kind of umbrellaed over to energy efficiency because in the mechanism, it's defined as net loss revenue. But I think a very important distinction is that in the energy efficiency statute, it is their net loss revenue does not appear anywhere. It's actually termed net income. And so I think if you're looking that yes, the term loss revenue is in here, but it's not in the energy efficiency statute. That is a term that came out of Act 236. So I am personally not surprised that it made it into Act 62 because this entire section here is looking at net metering customers. If you look at Section B, there's a provision. It talks about customer generators will essentially be grandfathered. They can remain on the one-to-one rate until May 31 of 2029. So there were provisions in there for customers to protect them, similar to, I think, what Vice Chair Belser was asking, what do you do if things change? So there were protections for customers built in. It goes through looking at the existing net metering programs. Is that methodology appropriate? You need to determine a new successor tariff. But of course, at that time, no one knew what that successor tariff would look like. But what we did know at the time was that the current tariff was allowing the utility to get lost revenues as dubbed from Act 236 settlement. And so then when you go down and go into I, it talks about, the utility can continue to recover that. That lost revenue that's in the DER program is to remain in place for those customers. So again, we're not, changing the rules of the game midstream. But going forward in June 1, 2021 is the date that new solar choice tariffs will come about, whatever they may look like. And so when I read this, I read it that this section is talking about the existing net metering program. And it is not then saying forevermore, in my opinion, it's not saying forevermore, anybody who's a customer generator cannot do any type of energy efficiency program, because that's really what that position would take. I would also note in that customer generator, in that section, the language says it prohibits, prohibited from recovering lost revenues associated with customer generators who apply for customer generator programs. When I look at the definition of customer generator, give me a second. It talks through, various things that you would expect. They generate their own electricity, but there's also two pieces here that they're interconnected and operate in parallel phase and synchronization with an electrical utility and comply with applicable interconnection standards, and that it's intended to primarily offset part or all of a customer generator's own electrical energy requirements. And I think one of our witnesses may have mentioned this earlier, but those two pieces, and I am not an engineer, I think we established that early on, but through my experience, those two pieces relate to somebody exporting energy. Because you don't interconnect with the utility if you plan on using everything yourself. You interconnect so you can export energy, but also purchase energy. So that interconnection piece, as well as the parallel phase and synchronization, those are all terms related to the export of energy. And the reason I call that out is because net metering deals with exports. The behind the meter, it doesn't, but we debated long and hard, what's the value of that exported energy? Energy efficiency, or however you term it, is all consumption. It has nothing to do with exports. So while they may be a customer generator, I personally would argue it is not a customer generator program because that deals with exports. energy efficiency is all consumption. As I think what Ms. Huber said, we don't even look at exports when looking at energy efficiency. So to me, they're two very distinct programs. And personally, I would hate to see a broad strokes, because there is similar, there's lost revenues. I would hate to see us going forward telling all customers who have solar or other renewables on their home that they cannot participate in energy efficiency programs because this term that isn't even in the energy efficiency statute.
Thank you. You remind me that when reading statutes, it's important to check definitions. Customer generator, I thought I knew what that was, so I'm going to go back and look at that again. Witness Huber, do you want to add anything to that?
Commissioner, I think that was great, very comprehensive. And the only thing maybe I would add is that, as Witness Steph said, a completely different animal, net loss revenue to the loss revenue that we're talking about in a customer generator program. I think the net loss revenue is 80% less than the loss revenue featured in the customer generator program, just to give you an order of magnitude of how different these things are.
Glad I asked. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
No further questions.
We're in recess until 3:45. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to the Public Service Commission of South Carolina. We're here in dockets number 2021-143E and 2021-144E. Present in the hearing room, we have Commissioners J. Williams, C. Williams, and Belzer. Joining us virtually, we have Commissioners Powers, Caston, and Thomas. All right. Do we have any more commissioner questions for the witnesses?
Chairman Williams, could I just ask one more question?
Yes, sir. Commissioner Caston.
Mr. Huber, something I was thinking about the break, I may ask in your view or opinion. Is that okay?
Oh, please.
Does the company consider or believe that solar panels, I guess, generate electricity more efficiently than the company's other generation sources?
Commissioner, I think that's a little bit outside of my zone of expertise. All that I can offer is that, you know, these panels are connected to the actual customer, you know, side of the meter. So there's virtually zero losses, you know, probably no losses, practically speaking, just because it's going right to the load source from the roof. So from that standpoint, that the resource is just right there connected into the home, there's efficiencies to be gained, but I reach my limit of knowledge pretty quickly as you know, talk about different forms of generation and efficiencies.
I understand. I was sitting here thinking about it. See, that we don't need to take breaks unless we think too many things, I suppose. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
All right, any redirect?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We do have some redirect for Mr. Huber. Just for the record purposes, my name is Ashley Cooper on behalf of the companies. Mr. Huber, I want to show you. Mr. Huber, are you familiar? Have you read the company's application in this docket?
Yes.
The E application. Mr. Huber, can you read the first line of the application and you see something that's circled?
So I tried to do that. Oh, yes, sir. I was going to say I didn't do a great job yesterday in hindsight. So the pursuant to South Carolina code, and I think that might be annotated 58-37-20.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Huber. And that's the EE statute, correct?
That's my understanding. Much clearer.
Oh, yes, thank you. Thank you very much. And do you see, sorry, can we go back to that one more time? All right, perfect. And Mr. Huber, the commission's, do you see the commission's generic order referenced anywhere? I'm sorry, let me repeat the question.
Right.
The solar choice generic order, you see that referenced anywhere?
I don't believe so.
Thank you. This one may be a little more difficult, but I think if we zoom in on the top half, I think that may cover it. My hands get shaky when you say that. And this may be hard, Mr. Hubert, to see this and read it, but can you make out the circled lines on, oh, perfect, thank you.
Yep. Yeah, it's the South Carolina code, again, the 58-37-20.
And that's the EE code.
That's my understanding.
And it says, could you read the first sentence?
Yep. That South Carolina code authorizes the establishment of the EE DSM mechanism recently adopted by the Commission through order number 2021-33 issued in docket number 2015-163-E.
Okay. And could you, tell you what, just not so it doesn't go so long, but can you start with this circled part?
Sure.
And read right to here, and let's see how much that
Sure.
goes.
That code further provides that the purpose of this section only, the term, okay, for the purposes of this section only, the term demand-side activity means a program conducted by an electric utility for the reduction or more efficient use of energy requirements of the utility or its customers, including but not limited to utility transmission and distribution system efficiency, customer conservation and efficiency, load management, cogeneration, and renewable technologies.
And what three words do you see are highlighted in bold?
Renewable energy technologies.
And that's pursuant to the South Carolina EE statute, correct?
Correct.
Is there any reference on this page to the Commission's order in the generic solar choice docket?
No.
Thought I was getting better at putting that on straight, but and this is the last page of the application, Mr. Huber. So this is where well, rather than me stating anything, could you read the part that begins wherefore?
Wherefore, Duke Energy Progress LLC respectfully requests that pursuant to this application of the provisions of South Carolina Code 58-37-20, South Carolina Code, annotated regs 103823, and order number 2021-33, Commission.
Okay. And do you see on this page, the last page of this application, where we're asking for this to be, we respectfully request the Commission approve this application, do you see any reference to the solar choice generic order at all on this page?
No, I do not.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Huber. And do you recall the parties' direct witnesses that were filed with this application?
Sorry, which parties?
All right, let me start over.
Yeah.
Let me ask it this way. Did you provide direct testimony in this docket?
No, I did not.
Okay. Did Ms. Ford provide direct testimony in this docket?
No, she did not.
Okay. Do you recall who from the companies provided direct testimony in this docket?
I believe it was Tim Duff and Linda Powers.
Correct. Thank you. Yes, she's behind you, so that was good. And do you know what area of the company Mr. Ms. Powers and Mr. Duff work?
Yeah, they lead up the energy efficiency programs and regulatory side of the House.
And did they participate in the generic solar docket?
Like as a party.
No, I'm sorry. Did they
Or is it-
provide direct testimony on behalf of the companies in the rec?
No.
And so, is it fair to say, so when the companies filed its application and it filed its direct testimony, it's fair to say it relied solely on the South Carolina EE statute?
That's correct.
And it did not rely on any statement or finding from the Solar Choice generic order.
That's my understanding.
So had the commission approved it at that point, it would have been approving it completely and totally under only the South Carolina EE statute.
That's correct.
Okay. Okay. Mr. Huber, tell me when you can see this page clearly.
I can see it.
All right. I'd like for you to start with, can you see the very top word that says viewing? It's a little bit hard to see because it's top left. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Can you read just to the colon, please?
Viewing the facts most favorable to the applicant companies, the following material facts, therefore, are undisputed.
Okay. Sorry, you trailed off at the end. They
Are
what?
undisputed.
Thank you. Okay. And can you read the highlighted bullets?
Sure. The companies are seeking lost revenues through the programs. These programs fall within the Solar Choice program, and the South Carolina Solar Choice, the Solar Choice program was approved pursuant to South Carolina Code 58-40-20. According to South Carolina Code 58-40-20, electrical utilities are prohibited from recovering lost revenues associated with customer generators who apply for customer generator.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. And next time I won't walk in front of you when I ask you to read something. So, in part, is it your understanding, did you file rebuttal testimony to discuss whether the programs fall within the Solar Choice program?
My testimony was a rebuttal to witness Horn and witness Morgan.
Okay. But there would need to be a discussion of the generic docket if you wanted to show that the programs were not part of the Solar Choice program, correct?
Correct. And I hit on some of those themes in my testimony.
And so the company, to be clear, made its application 100% under just the EE statute, correct?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hubert, I'm sorry, I'm testing your memory here again. And I can go find, actually, I can put up the solar. I tell you, do you have the Solar Choice? Sorry, just the Act 62 Solar Choice out of Act 62. I don't want to test your memory too much on a Friday afternoon.
Testing my eyesight and memory.
Yeah. I just want to be able to show you that. We had to follow. No, we already had to follow that. Here, it's on there. That's fine. You have one more that shows that the commission shall direct. Yeah. Yeah, ma'am. Let me read it. Okay. Do you see where it says F1? Okay. That's great. Thank you. Well, I think it looks good. Can you, Mr. Huber, can you see F1?
Yes.
Okay. Would you please read F1 into the record?
Sure. After notice and opportunity for public comment and public hearing, the commission shall establish a solar choice metering tariff for customer generators to go into effect for applications received after May 31, 2021.
Okay, so that's a date in the Act 62, Solar Choice has a date that says you've got to have a solar choice tariff in effect for customers who apply after May 31, 2021, correct?
Correct.
So you had, in South Carolina, you had to file a successor program called Solar Choice by a legislative date. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Was there a similar legislative date for the EE proposal in South Carolina?
No.
Is there a legislatively mandated date in North Carolina where you have to file a successor NEM program?
I believe so. I think it's 27, perhaps.
Well, is that a deadline by which, well, and maybe, okay, maybe 2027 is your deadline, is what you're saying. You can't remember.
I can't recall. It could be 2029, and it might not even be there.
How about this? Are you comfortable that in North Carolina, is there a deadline that would have been prior to the May 31st deadline?
There's no deadline I'm aware of before that stated deadline right there.
Would this deadline have had anything to do with the order in which the companies made their filings?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, you're going to respond to the near-term deadlines set by an individual state's legislature, and in this case, South Carolina legislature made it clear that this was a very near-term requirement.
Thank you, Mr. Depp. All right, I'll get to more familiar questions here, I promise. You may recall that Mr. Bateman provided you with a chart yesterday afternoon. And it was a chart about solar choice eliminating a 1-to-1 ratio. Do you recall that chart?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. Did that take into account a subset of customers must give up control of their heaters for 25 years?
No.
Okay, thank you. Finally, I want to go back to something you said in response to a commissioner question, and I believe you said a cabin in the woods. Do you recall bringing up a cabin in the woods?
Yes.
So hypothetically, that cabin is not connected to the grid.
Correct.
Is it possible that a let's say the Consumer Protection Bureau, Federal Bureau, right? They may have a concern for equipment for young children that could be used in that cabin in the woods, correct?
Correct.
And they could have standards that they set for that childhood, for equipment used for children that could be applicable to that house in the woods.
Correct. The federal government reaches far and wide on a variety of different programs.
Correct. But also different agencies and departments have different focuses. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
And it's possible that a department could have an interest in the efficiency of a battery that is purchased by the person who owns that cabin in the woods. Is that correct?
Absolutely. And the safety of that device.
And so that battery may have a rating that the government believes is important to that individual.
Correct.
But does that rating have anything to do with Duke Energy as a utility?
No.
Okay. So and if you could, I just really need to focus on the top line where it says section 5837, if that could be in focus. Mr. Huber, can you read the entirety of that first top line? Well, sorry. That's okay.
I'm sure going to try. Okay, let's see how it goes. The South Carolina Public Service Commission may adopt procedures that encourage electrical utilities and public utilities providing gas services subject to the jurisdiction of the commission to invest in cost-effective energy-efficient technologies and energy conservation programs.
Okay, so recognizing that there could be various agencies that have various definitions for efficiency, correct?
Correct.
So you have to look at the focus of a particular agency, correct?
Absolutely.
Would it surprise you that the mission of the South Carolina Public Service Commission is to serve the public of South Carolina by providing open and effective regulation and adjudication of the state's public utilities?
That sounds right.
And so this is a statute that the legislature provided on energy efficiency related to the Public Service Commission's focus and charter, mission, if you will.
That's what I believe.
So when you okay, this may be a little more difficult given this, but do you see the word? So you see the words? I don't know if you can. So can you read this section about income? Tell you what, can I read just to speed this along, the section about income? I'm going to read you a section from here, and it says that the Public Service Commission to establish rates, charges that ensure that the net income of an electrical or gas utility regulated by the commission after implementation of specific cost-effective energy conservation measures is at least as high as the net income would have been if the energy conservation had not been implemented. Is that right?
That looks right.
So to make sense of that, is it more important to consider the impact a measure has on the utilities at the system level, or does it make sense to consider the impact on an individual customer level?
Mr. Chairman, this is Andrew Bain. Excuse me, this is Andrew Bain. Sorry. This is Andrew Bateman with ORS. I would respectfully object that it's clearly asking Mr. Huber for a legal interpretation of the statute.
Mr. Chairman, I'm actually asking him from a technical perspective. I'm asking him to, from a technical perspective, to talk. It's talking about measures that put it at least in, it would have been had it not been implemented. So I'm just asking him from a technical perspective to help us understand, what's seeing energy efficiency at the utility level versus the crux to my question. Let me say it this way. Is distinguishing between measuring at the utility level versus the individual home. And so I believe that's asking for his technical explanation. I'm not asking him necessarily to go through and input these words and give a legal interpretation of these words.
Mr. Chairman, if Mr. Cooper wants to ask Mr. Huber, questions to elicit facts from Mr. Huber, that's one thing. But Mr. Cooper, in this case, specifically read a statute and then asked Mr. Huber, what does this mean?
That's what you did.
Well
Can you rephrase the question?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me try it this way. Let me try to. I'll back up. It says these procedures must provide incentives and cost recovery for energy suppliers and distributors who invest in energy supply and in-use technologies that are cost-effective, environmentally acceptable, and reduce energy consumption or demand. Allow management programs sufficient to make these programs at least as financially attractive as construction of new generating facilities. If you measure energy efficiency at the household level, what's the relevance of comparing that to the financial attractiveness of a new generating facility?
Right. Yeah. It's completely different sectors and focuses, and so and I think we got into this a bit with end use efficiency and standards for devices that the DOE, Department of Energy, might look at. But for our purposes, we're looking at how these measures impact the grid and grid resources.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. I have no further questions. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my redirect for both. For Mr. Huber, I have no redirect for Ms. Ford.
Thank you, sir. Office of Regulatory Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Huber. How are you?
Good afternoon. Yeah, doing well. How you doing?
I'm good, thanks. Mr. Huber, I'm going to put a few things on this substitute Elmo. I please would ask for a bit of patience while we bring it into focus.
You bet.
Mr. Huber, this was my copy of your testimony, so I have placed a sticky note over a bit of my notes, but once it comes up here, I'd respectfully request that you read the highlighted copy. This is your rebuttal testimony filed in this case. And please read both the question and the answer.
You guys are making me do a lot of reading today. Please provide an overview of the Commission's findings in the generic docket and the solar choice dockets as it relates to these proceedings. That's the question. Answer. In the generic docket, the Commission evaluated the existing net metering programs and established a framework for evaluating certain aspects of net metering programs going forward, including the impacts of solar on the company's systems.
And I'm going to move it down if you don't mind reading the sentence just subsequent to this. Can you see that, Mr. Huber?
Yep. Importantly, for these proceedings, the Commission expressly ordered that when evaluating consumption of behind-the-meter solar energy, that consumption shall be treated as energy efficiency or demand-side management resources, and then order numbers.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. And now I'm going to put up a piece of the company's application, and I've got a couple of highlighted sections. I respectfully request that you read those as well. Mr. Huber, in just a second, this ought to pop up. Do you mind reading that highlighted sentence?
To that end, DEP proposes to offer an incentive for each new watt of solar PV
Mr. Chairman, I want to object. I want to make sure I understand how this is within the scope of my redirect, because I talked about the solar choice generic order and asked him questions about that.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. I believe Mr. Cooper also brought up the application with the intent of showing that this was not within the solar choice docket, and that's why I brought this up, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I brought it up for the limited purpose of walking him through the references to the EE statute, and that the application solely relies on the current EE statute, and the application does not cite any holding from this commission in an order as grounds for this program.
That's what he did.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Objection sustained.
Grab that F1 section that you brought up. Yeah, do you have it? Can I put it up there on the ELMA? Thank you. Thanks. It's hard to see. Mr. Huber, I've just put up on the ELMO, the substitute ELMO, F1, the section of Act 62, which you read previously. I was hoping to ask you a few questions about it, though I won't ask you to read any of it, so I don't know that it's necessary that it's up there at this point in time, though we may want to bring it up for reference in a second. Mr. Huber, the statute says that the solar choice net metering tariff had to go into effect May 31, 2021. Is that correct?
That's what I recall, yes.
And it's true that solar choice net metering tariff had to go into effect May 31, 2021, because the one-to-one rate was, the offering of the one-to-one rate was ending May 31, 2021. Isn't that correct?
I'm not 100% sure if there were
Again,
other...
Mr. Chairman, I would object. I brought up the limited, I just discussed the relative dates and wanted to show the dates that there was a date required for solar choice. There was no date required for energy efficiency, and there was no date in North Carolina. So that was the limited purpose I got into with F1.
Mr. Chairman, he brought up the date. I think it's fair game to ask Mr. Huber on.
Could you ask the question again?
Yeah, yes, sir, absolutely. I asked Mr. Huber, let me try to rephrase it. I asked Mr. Huber if it was correct that the date that the May 31, 2021, the reason for its existence in F1 to create the net metering solar choice tariff was because the one-to-one rate was ending on May 31, 2021.
No, how is that improper, Mr. Cooper?
Well, I think it's one step removed from it. It's going down a road, and I'm just saying if he wants to ask that, I mean, that's a subset of saying, I guess, regardless of whether the one-to-one was ending, the legislature put in a date that said we had to establish a successor tariff. So, you know, if I suppose Mr. Bateman wants to ask if this expiration would have had an impact on a particular provision of Act 236, we will stipulate that this this was a date that all of Act 236 NEM programs were set to expire. But any other follow-up questions about the restriction? I just want to let Mr. Bateman know I'll object if there are further questions along those lines.
Mr. Chairman, how about this? I'll tie my question not to Mr. Cooper's discussion of F1, but rather Mr. Cooper's discussion of the one-to-one rate.
Well, we're definitely splitting hairs here. So as long as your examination is within the scope of his, I think you'll be fine.
Mr. Huber, would you like me to repeat the question?
Please.
Yep.
Yeah.
Let me try. Mr. Huber, you saw in F1 that the Solar Choice net metering tariffs, thank you, Melissa, had to go into effect May 31, 2021. And Mr. Cooper discussed with you briefly the one-to-one rate and the similarities or dissimilarities between the right-hand bar and the left-hand bar on that chart. My question is it true, or it is true, is it not, that the May 31, 2021 date was necessary for the net metering tariffs because the one-to-one rate was ending on May 31, 2021, correct?
So that's
Mr. Chairman, I object. This is now more clear as to the two questions. I asked a line of questions about the date that the companies were required to submit and file and have a new net energy metering tariff known as Solar Choice on file. That was one line of questioning on the dates. I separately asked Mr. Huber if he remembered a chart that Mr. Bateman had showed him that had nothing to do with a date, that just had to do with the charts and whether those charts took into account the mandatory participation of customers to allow someone else to control their heater for 25 years. So he's welcome to ask questions on either one of those two questions. I don't dispute that. I just want to be really clear as to there's a narrow scope for each of those two questions.
Do you have a position?
Mr. Chairman, I believe my question falls within the scope of those two questions.
Okay. Well, we've been objecting and responding more than the witness has asked questions. So I'm going to give you a little bit of leeway so we can try to get through this examination. I'm going to overrule your objection, Attorney Cooper.
Mr. Huber, would you like me? Okay.
I got it. Okay. I really don't know all the reasons in the legislation for requiring that date.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. It is true, though, that the one-to-one rate ended May 31, 2021, correct? Or the offering of the one-to-one rate?
I believe there's, right, there was a program that ended at that May date.
And the program was the offering of the one-to-one rate?
From what I can tell from memory and from the limited readings of today.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. One more question, Mr. Huber. Mr. Huber, Mr. Cooper brought up the definition of EE in South Carolina, and I would offer you now, this is in the record, this is Mr. Morgan's testimony. I believe it's page 2 or 3, though I'll confirm that in just a second, Mr. Huber. But I'm going to read this, if you don't mind, and you can please correct me if I'm mistaken. The North Carolina Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Portfolio Standard, REPS, section 62-133.8, A4 provides another representative definition of EE. Energy efficiency measure means an equipment, physical, or program change implemented after January 1, 2007 that results in less energy used to perform the same function. Energy efficiency measure includes, but is not limited to, energy produced from a combined heat and power system that uses non-renewable energy resources. energy efficiency does not include demand side management. Did I read that correctly, Mr. Huber?
And Mr. Chairman, I would object to this. I asked if there was a date in North Carolina for NEM in North Carolina. I didn't get into the definition of energy efficiency in North Carolina, and I don't believe I asked the date of energy efficiency in North Carolina. I did ask the date, if there were any dates in South Carolina energy efficiency. I did ask if there was a date in South Carolina for solar choice, and I did ask if there was a date in North Carolina for NEM, but I did not ask about a date for EE in North Carolina. I did not ask about a definition of EE in North Carolina.
Mr. Chairman, may I briefly respond? I believe Mr. Cooper did discuss with Mr. Huber various agencies with various definitions for energy efficiency. And for that purpose, I brought up the North Carolina definition.
Okay, did you not bring those items up, Attorney Cooper?
I brought up at a very high level that different government agencies could have different focuses and therefore they may have their own definition. For example, I said the Department of Consumer Protection may have its own unique interest. I noted that this commission had its mission statement, which stated the regulation of public utilities, and therefore it had its own EE statement.
Understood. Well, once you open the door, I'm not sure if you can control how far Attorney Bateman goes down the hall. I'm going to overrule your objection.
Mr.
Please
Chairman,
proceed.
that was my final question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Huber, Mr. Cooper.
Did you answer the question? He didn't. I overruled the objection.
I'm sorry, Mr. Huber. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you read it correctly.
Thank you, Mr. Huber. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All right. I mean, we haven't been in here that long, have we? Maybe we have. I'm sorry. Commissioner Williams says we have been in here that long. All right. So it is 4:31, and I've been asked for us to recess for the day at 5 o'clock. We have one witness left. Do you think we can get through that witness in about 30 minutes?
Mr. Chairman, this is Abe Mixon. It's our witness, Eddie Moore. I think it's unlikely that we would get through Mr. Moore in the next 30 minutes, given that we have arguments on ORS's motion to strike his rebuttal testimony. And I don't know how much cross that other parties would have, but I would think it would be surprising to get through it in 30 minutes.
All right.
Just I would like to wrap up today. I'm sure we all would.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. You know what? I think you're right. So, Ms. Ford, Mr. Huber, you may step down. You are excused. We're in recess until Tuesday morning, 10 a.m.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mm-hmm.